Good afternoon, Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited fans, and welcome to another dry day in Retford. I'm back on with the Stag, okay. I said in the previous video I wasn't sure if I had shown the sections of the video I'm going to do in this video, and basically all the B pillar, C panel, B panel and A pillar and A panel parts that I repair as I'm going along. So basically this video is committed to that. I'll show you over on the car. So I'm hoping what you can see here, excuse the mess, it's a messy old process. The Stag sill is now in. Obviously I painted that inside. It's spot welded across here, as you can see, across the door post. I haven't done any grinding back yet at all, so please excuse some of the shonky looking welds there. It's spot welded all the way across the bottom here. Now hopefully you've seen a video of me doing that on the other side, but I know I definitely didn't do the next section, so that's all welded on. So that is all good, and then what I've done is I've checked the fitment to the door. The door needs a little bit of work. Basically that's the door that I did a video on and I repaired the bottom of it. Some of it needs a little bit of adjustment, which I'll do at a later date. This video is committed to showing you how I do this, which I've done, so I'll apologise in advance, and this section here and this piece here, okay? Now this I haven't done, so I can show you this. You can see here though, this gives you a rough idea, and again it's all unground, but once I've ground it off I'll show you it. Basically you can see the maroon part is what the piece that I left in. This section here I cut off to take the sill off, and as you can see I've seam welded, butt welded a piece of steel down there and then spot welded it through, okay, so as per original. This part here I had to remove to get the strip in there, the sill in there neatly, and what I've done is I've basically seam welded, butt welded all the way down there and all the way down there. Now here, because I've spot welded here but I haven't spot welded here or here, and the reason for that is I've burnt through this weld here and this weld here. Now this needs shaping back, but when I grind these back with the flat disc I'll do that at the same time and it'll make a nice smooth transition, hence leaving it a little taller at the top there. It takes nothing to cut that little bit off. You should be able to see there, if you look at the back here, you can see how the weld has burnt right through on both sides there. That's why I haven't worried about spot welding through as well, because basically it's just overkill. But that has made a nice firm repair. Now, if this had been rotten here, I would have made it further back. None of this was rotten. I only damaged it removing the old sill. And when I say damaged, it was a necessary damage. It wasn't something I did because I'm just rough as houses. So, as we come back to this section, okay, this is one of the easiest sections in the car. The first job is to repair this piece here. Now this is a reinforcer, this part there. It comes down here to the sill, okay, and then this is welded to it in several pieces. Originally it's one fancy pressing, but of course I can't press those shapes because I don't have the facilities here, and you probably don't at home. This part here, I'll just push the wire up out the way. This wire here, idiot, this part here is then another support for the inner, okay, for the hood frame and everything, which again welds here. Now, you can't see, but basically it welds to a section here that's cleaned off in there, okay? Now, you'll notice before I put the sill on, I had the foresight to clean the paint off here, the electro coating, and here. Again, you can see there's a pressing there where this piece fits into. If I bring you over here, this is that section that I removed from the corner, okay? So that's the framework. Now, as you can see by that, that's quite a complicated piece to make. And what I've done is, I've very slowly ground all the pieces off it. Here, just unstitched it a little at a time. I haven't drilled out the spot welds, I've just sanded the material off the bottom, okay? As you can see, there's still a teensy tiny bit there that I just need to take off. Okay, just to show you that's where it was spot welded. You can see where I've made cuts in it and things when I had to take it off the sill originally, when I had to take the sill off. Because it's not an easy process, quite honestly, to remove this, you know, to cut around the sill. You could cut around it maybe and leave this piece attached to that and then trim it all off in the car. But I find it easier for the sake of a weld here, here, and a weld here and here to do that. If I bring you over here, you can see that that piece now fits back in there, okay? So that goes into that part there. Now, normally, this section would be spot welded through this bottom lip here to the sill. Now, if you look at that once I've put it in, I can't get to do that. So what I'm going to do is stitch weld along this edge here once I'm really pleased with the fit. This similarly was spot welded, and again, I can't get to neatly spot weld that, so I will weld down this front lip here. It'll probably be stronger the way I do it than it was originally. But that's why I haven't repaired this part by putting a new section in there, because as you can see, that's if you have a look at one that's done, that would have been a thicker panel, so the panel probably would have come to my finger there, about half to an inch to 5/8. Now, the reason I don't re-spot weld there is because I've got the wing on, and I'm not taking the wing off. I want to remove as little of this as possible, and I've cut back to solid metal there. I can feel the thickness. It's not full of filler. It's not rotten. So there's no point me cutting off across here and doing more damage. So I've cut that off there, so that means it's more difficult to weld around. Now, you'll notice that once that's sat in place and it's level with the front like that, this part here is all out of shape. So what I need to do first is bend and twist and caress that until it fits. You can see how this piece here supports the outer skin here, and it is spot welded through, okay, and this edge here, where my finger is actually welded originally to here, and I will very carefully weld that back together, but I'll show you how I do that when I put it in. But what I need to do now is make this fit as best as I physically can. Now I've ground a little bit off the tops there, here, to leave a little bit of a gap, because although it's more difficult to weld a big gap, it does make sure that the panel will fit as close as it did originally as possible. That will go into there, and I will allow this should come right down to the base of the sill here, so I will have to weld a piece into there, but I'll show you how I'm going to do that afterwards as well. So what I'll do now is I'll make that fit better, okay, or I'll make it fit correctly, and spend a little time getting this to really fit nice and comfortably. The only difficult weld now is in there. If you see in there, there's a bit of a seam that needs to go across there, which is difficult, but I should be able to get that from one side or the other. But I want that to be as neat as possible, because obviously I can't get in there to grind it back again. So I will reshape this, and then we'll come back and I'll get that glued in. So hopefully you can see that that now fits pretty well. Okay, this edge here is flat. Okay, now I can get to grind that back a little. This corner fits nicely, this corner fits nicely. I will burn that back a little bit, but that fits quite close to there. It's not perfect, but it's close. This fits in here, and I'd love to tell you that I did all that, you know, purely by skill and proficiency, but I genuinely think it all happened by chance. This part here and here, I'm going to tap in once I've started, because it is actually conveniently holding this in place. So I will put a tack on here and probably a run across to about here. So I'll leave probably 1/8 of an inch there. I'll weld around there, and then I'll stitch this in, and then that'll be solid enough to just tap that in. So what I'm going to do is weld that in now. Now, I'm on quite a high current for this. Allow me just to clean the welder tip, nozzle, shroud, whatever the hell you call it. Because I don't want to be holding a lot of power on there continually. I just want a quick spot so as not to burn everything up. So, teensy tiny bit of wire coming out of there. And I'll just put a spot on that corner first. Now, we're going to get a lot of smoke here. and unfortunately there's like wax oil in there, which is great for preserving the car, but literally a nightmare when you come to weld, because it sets on fire, it melts, and it runs exactly the way you try to weld and destroys your weld. So I have cleaned as much of it out as I can. I'm going to try and put a small run in here. You'd literally think I'd left gallons of that stuff on there, and I really haven't. It's horrible stuff. Again, small run here. The chugging from the welder is because of that stuff. I'm just going to put a little bit more weld on there. Now that's a lot larger weld than I would like, but I can get to knock that back, so I'm not too worried about that. Now I'm going to start and put a little weld on here. Lovely stuff, absolutely lovely. Daily struggle. However, it is what it is. Now, at this point, if I was doing this just purely for artistic entertainment, I would grind all that weld back, or at least knock it back a little bit with my air sander and make it all look lovely and flouncy for you. But the fact is, this isn't just done for that. This is actually me repairing it. And if you start hitting it with a grinder too early, then what happens is it thins out the metal around where you're trying to weld. So one thing I've learned over these years is try not to knock it back with the grinder until you are finished, unless there is an area you can't get to afterwards. So I'm going to try and weld in this corner here now. It's gone really well. Now you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but you'll notice this part here, look, is moved. There's a huge step appeared there, look. You see that? This is how things move when you're welding. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to put a spot of weld on there, and I'm just going to hold it back with these so I don't burn myself. Now, if you're watching this in America, great stuff. Love the wax on. If you're watching this in America and you're working on an American car, American produced and manufactured car, you will have the joy of having the steel that's literally the thickest steel I've ever worked on. I've done a 1950s pickup once, Chevy pickup. It's a 3100 pickup. It was like the thickest steel. It was lovely to weld, and it was really nice quality steel as well. So there's my stitch on there. Now you're welding corner to corner. So it just welds beautifully smooth like that. And I'm just going to do the same on this corner, and it's purely just to keep it nice and even. One other advantage to dotting about is that it allows the metal to cool a little, because that currently is still probably 1500 degrees. So if I was just going to weld that little crack up there where I've split it with the angle grinder. But the fact is that part now is probably hotter than Hades because I've just welded it. This part up here is cool enough to touch, but it's always worth letting it cool down a little bit and just take your time. I'm not worried about it warping. All I'm bothered about is it burning through. But what I will do now, just weld that up. Now, one other thing I'll point out at this stage is this part of the metal here. So if I point to it with my welder, this part here requires more heat to weld than it does here. So in that effect, if you'll notice that I started here where it was cut on the edge, okay, and that's purely because the metal is cooler before you start welding. So if you hit that first, you've less chance of it blowing a hole. And then as I work across, the heat is already in the metal, but of course here it doesn't matter. But there it does. So that stops you getting that blow when you get to the top of a section. So if you look at this section here, if you see where I've just put a little stitch on there, if I can get it to zoom in, I tend to start at the top here. Because if you start at the bottom, by the time you get to the top here, it's going to be sort of 2,000 degrees. So you touch it with the welder and it'll just go and blow it away. If you start here when it's cold, you've less chance of that happening. It'll still do it somewhat. You know, you're welding, it's impossible not to do that, but that just gives you a better job, really, in my experience. Where possible. It isn't always possible, of course. But yeah, so that's that piece just starting to get stitched in now. If I take that bit off the welder and attempt to bring the welder closer, what I'm going to try and do now, and I do need the torch myself for this, and I'm sorry about that, is I'm going to try and weld this part in here. Now that needs to be touching as best it can. So basically what I'm trying to do is remove the gap. You should be able to see there's a small gap in there. If I might need to turn the camera a little. Oops, sorry about that. If you can see there on the camera, there's a small gap here where the sill curves, and that's purely because, oh sorry, again, this is significantly easier without you watching, but I just want that to go down a bit and close that gap up. I've lost the contour shape of the sill, that's all, by dressing it. So I'm just going to give that a few taps. Now, of course, I can't get in there to hit it straight down, fairly obviously. But of course, if there's a huge gap there, it's going to be a nightmare to try and get it to weld. You'll notice how it was all perfectly clean material and now it looks disastrous. This part is going to be really awkward with you sat there. So what I'll do is I'll move you a little to here. Hopefully you can still see what I'm doing. And that'll do nicely, madam. Now if I'd left that gap, as soon as I hit it with the welder, it just burn a massive hole. Now I can weld that hole back up, but as you can see, I can't get in there to grind that back at all. So it's a lot easier to get it right in the first place. Now I also need to weld across here as best I can. But unfortunately, y'all's got your head in the way. Weld across there, and then there's another gap of bubble. Now, there's a little bit of an admission here that I do like it to aesthetically look right and neat, but also nobody's ever going to see that again once I've finished here, because there'll be a section down here and it'll be tied into the back of the wing, and genuinely no one will ever see it. However, there is also a duty of care to make sure it is strong enough, because it does, you know, it's fitted for a reason. I love when people used to say, you know, it's just a panel, it's not, there's no strength in it or anything. Well, Triumph, like everyone else, didn't fit panels for the sake of it. They didn't do it because they were trying to use more steel and get rid of it, you know. They put sections in there because they needed to put sections in there. Well, they certainly thought it should have them in, and if it had them in before, it's going to have them in again while ever I'm on the job. Now, this part is a nightmare to weld, but we'll try as best. That'll do nicely, madam. It's got a stitch on the inside. It's a little bit scruffy, not overly chuffed with that, but the fact is, getting in there to do that is really, really difficult. Right, sorry, I had to move the camera out of the way so I could see what I was doing, but there's the pile of bird poo in there. However, it's not as bad as it actually looks on the camera, and I know that because I'm looking through the camera. That side's got some welds on it, so we're good there. We're strong, we're happy. Okay, these welds here, oops, probably better if you don't touch them when you've literally just laid them. These ones here I'll grind back a little bit, I can get to them, so that's all right. So this is now strong in there again. So that means I can turn my attention to this part here in the door frame. Now, this is particularly important that the shape is correct here, purely because this section comes over the top of it. This part, let me just turn the welder off. This part leaves me with a little bit of a quandary actually. Thinking out loud really. That there's a large gap here. If I get a 4mm drill bit, you can see just how large the gap is. Okay, so what I'm thinking is, I'm just going to ignore that for now. I'm going to seam weld across here, because my new panel can go into there and then across and up. But what I'm going to do here for now is leave that. Now I can, when I put the outer section on, I can spot weld through here, and I can then seam weld down here and grind back and put this panel gap in, because I do like the panel gap to be there. I can't get behind to weld a piece of steel in, but I may just place a piece of steel in there and weld up the inside edge, weld up the outside edge. And although it's stepped back ever so slightly, at least then that panel is nice and strong. So I need to have a little think about what I'm going to do there before I proceed. But this part now, although it is achingly hot and I probably shouldn't have touched it then, is now a lot stronger than it was. So that's regaining the strength in that section. The next part to do now is this part here that goes around the bottom of this. Is that strictly necessary? Not really, but it does need the piece going from the bottom to here. So this part here extending down so that that part is filled, and then that becomes part of this also. So what I'll do is I'll bend a piece, an S-shaped piece, that'll come across here, in through there, and then across this section here to here for now. I'm not going to do it right to the end here where it should be. I'm going to do it to here for now, and I'll explain why later. So, having a long and arduous think about that, what I've done is I've put a little piece of steel down the back of there, as you can see here, and that came into that corner nice and tight. I clamped it in with me large mouth clamps, so these clamps. And what I did was just a tiny spot weld at the bottom, not particularly in the right place, just to hold it there firmly. And then I've seam welded it down the edge of here and into the edge of here and filled up the gap and then ground it back. So as you can see, that's pretty smooth now. I cut this little section of the side body off here, but when I actually put the new section in, that will be getting butt welded together, and any gaps there I'll just fill up. It is good steel, but it now sits nice and far back so that the overlap will be smooth there. I may need to just take a little more out of there feeling at it, but that'll be fine. Here, I can't quite get that fillet weld out, but it may just depend on how that goes. Here is okay, here isn't. I was just starting to touch the sill with a cutting disc when I ground that out, which I don't want to do. I do have a die grinder and I have a little air grinder that I can get in there. So then I got started on this piece here in this corner, and I made that. This tiny little teeny whiny piece of steel to go in there. And it fits really nicely actually, just to go in there into the corner. Before I realised that actually my plan there was to put the corner back in there, bend it out and make all this out of one piece. So what I'm going to use that as a pattern. It will end up being used, but not directly. So what I'm going to do is transfer that to this piece of steel. This offcut here at the bottom, offcut at the bottom there. Okay, so that's going to then become this piece that's missing out of here. So it'll be spot welded in across there as per the originals, and then seam welded across the bottom of here. Now you'll see here there's a little bit of a lip on there. I'm not worried about that just at the moment too much. What I'm worried about this at the moment is it's stopping here, and then this piece to fill in there, because there's actually a recess here. There's a swage mark there. You can see where I haven't managed to clean out the primer. There's a piece of steel needs to go in there and be butt welded between here, spot welded onto here, but I will actually do a seam weld like I did at the front, and then it will have a spot weld in the end here. Now I won't do that because where the recess is here, I will seam weld across there and then spot here from about 1/2 inch to 1 inch further back. Okay, but you'll see that all in a minute. While I was doing that, I've just whipped the flat disc across the seam there, just because I had to grind these little bits out to see how that had turned out. And I've done this bit at the front here, so you can see the finished result now. As you can see, it's pretty neat. That is bare from the grinder, basically just bare out the angle grinder. I haven't done anything else to beautify it. I haven't even wiped it down. This will obviously need a smear of filler in there, but you always do. Oops, sorry. A smear of filler in there, but you always do. The seam there is good, because you need to keep this tight here, otherwise the door seal won't go on, the fur flexes. And as you can see, that's where the seam was there. It's all gone now, and it's all nice and smooth. These are the spot welds at the bottom, and I carried some of those just into the bottom here to make a fillet weld, just to make it a little teeny tiny bit stronger. It's just what I like to do. This will, of course, again, need a slight smear of filler here, but the wing will come down and cover this part anyway. So although that could probably do with a little bit of sand in there, but I need to do that with the edge of a cutting disc. This part's good, so that's all ready to be painted up, ready for the wing to go over, but of course I'm not doing that just yet. Excuse me, and the reason for that is if I have to take any of that paint back off, it's pointless. So you better get your sections in. I will obviously do it. That'll be the last thing before the new panel goes over the top. But yeah, that just sort of tidies it all up a bit. I can see there's little bits like here. Basically, I did it in the dark because I'm in a Yorkshireman and I'm too tight to turn the bloody lights on. So, you know, take that however you like, but it's true. So I'll transfer this now over to the steel, and I'll come back and we'll get it welded in. So hopefully you can see that piece I've made there. Okay, it's going to need a little bit of manipulation as it goes in, but it fits quite well into this corner here, which is where I needed it to fit, you know, best. I've had to machine a little teeny tiny bit out of here. That will actually get covered here, although I will weld that together, but when this outer panel here goes over the top of it, it will go round and into that corner, and I will weld across that corner. I will weld across that corner anyway. I always do that just to make it nice and strong. So there'll be no gaps left whatsoever, and obviously I'm going to weld this little hole up here as I go. So what I'm going to do is I'll zoom you out and I'll turn the welder back on. Hopefully you can hear what I'm doing. Well, I'm just going to get a couple of spots in tactical locations, which I know is no use to you whatsoever, me saying that, but what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to pull that out of here so it's nice and tight there, and I'm going to get one in here first, so about where the end of my finger is there, because that corner needs to sit flat and it needs to hold it in the right position for this corner here too. So that has to be a good tight fit in there. In fact, before I do that, actually, having looked at it, I'm just going to take a tiny bit off the top of there, and it is just a tiny bit. Just a little tickle with the flat wheel, just to get that in there nice and snug, like that, okay? It's pretty easy to put the metal back in anyway with the welder, so especially if you know, reasonably confident with it, which at least I am. So that's good now. It's flat here, although there is a gap. It is actually maintaining a flat corner there. It's flat here, pretty much. It's actually going back a little bit more than I would like, but that's not a problem, actually. Back is fine, because when the panel goes over it, all it means is there'll be a teeny tiny gap at the bottom, but as I say, I'll weld that in anyway, so there's no big deal. This is flat and smooth here, which is good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld all this up across the top here, a little at a time, and then after that, what I'll do is I'll drill the holes and just tap it through to do the spot welds. So they will be done afterwards. If I bother weld, actually I have a dual extension ring, so I can leave the grinder and the welder plugged in at the same time. Unfortunately, that exploded yesterday quite spectacularly. I wish I'd caught it on camera. It'd been excellent footage, but it was quite funny. Made me jump a bit, I'm not going to lie. So if we get that in there like that, obviously I can't clamp this, so I'm going to have to keep hold of it. So I'll just put a spot, I'll probably just start on this corner here. Like that. And then once that's cooled, I'll just check all my alignments again. It feels pretty good actually, to be fair. So I'll probably just bob a spot on here. I've got the welder turned up a little bit more at the moment. Just to burn into these corners, as you can see, the old, I'll tell you what I have done there, and you may be able to spot if you put in the comments, but I won't say about the comments, but I've left this longer here, and I wanted that cut off. So if I turn the welder off, a couple of issues there. First, burnt my finger quite badly there. It dripped on my finger. Two, I've got a scratch the size of Manhattan down the front of my welding mask, which is becoming awfully inconvenient. But as you can see, I just welded a little radius into that, just purely just to show off. It's straight out the welder and therefore hotter than the gates of Hades. Things to notice, tried to do it on a really high current at the back here to keep that as smooth as possible, because it is incredibly difficult to get in there and grind that off. I will get in there and grind that off, but I'll do it with my air sander, which takes forever. Air sander and die grinder in there, which, as I say, makes a huge amount of noise and is very, very awkward to do. I haven't welded this corner here, as you can see there, purely because when I come to this part here, I'll do that all on block. And if I try to weld that now, that'll be too hot and it'll burn through. This I did on a slightly lower current, and as you can see, it's left more of a blob, but there was a huge gap there. And the fit there now is quite nice. So the next job is to fold a piece and put it in there. And what I'll do is I'll turn a little step out of it there, which will make no difference whatsoever. I just didn't want to do it that way. Purely because it's just quicker, just not to have to trim it for that step. But we'll do that now. I'll bob that in. I'll grind this back here and whatever I can get to. And then what I'll do later on, once I've welded this in, sorry. Then what I'll do later on is I'll get the air grinder when that'll probably be tomorrow's job, not today's. So I've made that piece there. Fits in nicely. The only thing I've done is overbent the back there. So there's a bit of a gap there. But once I've tacked it down here, okay, on this part here and this part here, then I'll just tap that back. The corner is in the right place. This radius here is in the right place. I've left a little bit of a gap there so I can weld down that and make it really solid. And then I can weld down here and here. I'll show you what I'll do. I'll do a little bit at a time. and I'll do it real time so you can actually see me do it. If I just get that to balance on there. Okay, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing there. So I'll stick the welder on. One of the advantages of welding at high temperature, or high current I should say, is that there's a lot less cleanup afterwards. Because the weld penetration is stronger, obviously, it takes a lot less grinding off. Now this is going to get real hot real quick, so I'm just going to put that on there and get a spot weld wherever I can. Okay, it doesn't have to be beautiful, it just has to be strong. So now I've got that one in place, I can check my fitment carefully, try not to burn myself. So I just want to come down a little more on the corner, so I'm just going to tap it there. A little bit of a nasty weld that, not happy with that at all, but never mind. So came good in the end, so what I'm going to do is just roll that down, roll that in like that, so it fits to that piece there, like that. Okay, so that's now nice neat radius. Sorry. That fits in there lovely and flat. Now the bottom part there, it turns out, is a little bit long. I'll deal with that afterwards, but I'll show you how I'm going to deal with that in a second. So what I'm going to do is put a spot in the middle there. Now, you'll notice I burnt some of the material away there, but I was aiming to do that. I was trying to burn right through to the sill. So all that has now welded this piece to the sill, and this piece to the sill. Now I'm going to put a little nick in there with my chisel, like that, and I'm going to dress this down. You see how it's curved out like that? So now I'm going to weld this across here. It's really blooming hot, that. That's just an oversight really on my part. And it is entirely my fault, that. That's a pretty good fit. Now this has actually gone down a little there, so that's good. I can fill that well. Now I'm going to go down more on the welder. And I'm going to try and weld up here behind you. So what I did there, started down the seam and then I've worked back a little bit to fill that slight divot that I created when I bashed that down. Now I'm going to weld across there, and then just up at the top, and lay a little bit more material in there. That's a nice job now. Okay, so that just wants to go back in here. Just using my chisel as a drift. It won't damage it. That part still needs to come off. We're not worrying too much about that just yet. I'll show you how to deal with that in a second. And then there's a recess here, so that piece goes in flat and then it curves up. So I'm just shaping this to that recess so it's in this gap or slit. Now, it's springing ever so slightly, so what I'm going to do with my first weld is just push down on that. Just to hold it in position. There is literally no way of clamping it, so... And that's got it like that. Once it's solid like that, I can then dress it neater. Like this. Now I'm going to weld all the way across that, from here to there. Yep, pretty good. Then the final part, so just give that a tap back. Put my clamps on there, hold it at the top. Hold that in. That doesn't have to be dog tight. Try to ruin the clamps. And yes, if you over tighten them, it does ruin them. Give that tap to meet. Now I'm going to weld up here and around that corner. Get one up at the top there just to hold that in place. Now you'll probably notice that I'm holding it on longer as I weld. And that's purely because this is now thicker material up here. So that's the inner sill, which is about 1.5 to 2 mils thick. This is about 1 mil thick, and that's 1 mil thick. This is 1 mil thick. So I'm trying to make sure I get really good penetration in there. Do the other side. Now, what I've done there is left it a little low, and I did that on purpose, actually. And I know you sat there thinking, yeah, of course you did, old love. But that's so I can run a weld across the top now. But because I've just literally welded up those sides, I'm going to let that cool a little bit before I do that. But in the meantime, I'll weld across here. Like that. I'm going to let that cool a little bit before I weld this up. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that. So I'll turn the welder off, obviously. And I'm going to use my angle grinder. With a 1 mil cutting disc. I don't know if this is the bona fide way of dealing with it, but this is the way I deal with it. And I'm just going to cut into that corner until it's gone. And that's it, that piece is now gone. That now fits perfectly. It is better to spend a little longer getting the fit perfect. I rushed this a little bit, so that's on me. But that now fits in there. Lovely. Okay, nice and flush, so I can weld around the front here and fill that with weld. Now, there is a bit of an air gap behind there where it just comes out to meet here ever so slightly. So there might be some burn through. Don't bother about that. I want it to burn right through into the sill. It's not really any good just welding it to the other piece of steel in there. It needs to be burnt right through into the new sill. For strength, so I'll just weld up there. For the first weld here, I'll do a nice big blob, and then that'll bring that edge straight again up there. And I'll just keep that straight. And that straightens that line then across there. it doesn't make any difference. It's all going to be ground back and filled up, but the fact is, it just makes me feel better. I'm going to hit this with a big old burn through here. As you can see, didn't burn away anyway. Tiny spot to the bottom of the sill, and I will grind that back then. If you really want a gap down there like the car was originally, you can use your 1mm cutting disc and reinstate that gap. But I just like to make sure that this is welded to that, which is welded to that, and the holes there in between. So now I'm going to go across here. Just to reinstate that piece of metal there. Now that can be ground flat. As you can see, the edge is nice and flat there. The curve will come back into it. Once I've ground all this back, that'll be lovely. I'm going to grind that back now, and this edge here, and I'll show you that. But before I do that, I'm just going to whip the chassis plate off so I don't damage it. Three, two, one. So, just going to whip the chassis plate off. Alright, nice large drill bit. I did say to the owner I can make him a new one if he wishes, but he just doesn't want it to get lost, and he doesn't want these bits rolling around in the sill afterwards. So if I just get rid of those, and then when I'll tap those through, and when I vacuum all this out to paint it, I'll get rid of those. That can go up in the cupboard, locked away. So what I'm going to do is grind that back now. I'm just going to flat wheel it. A quick note on flat wheels and cutting discs and things like that. These I use for grinding on the edges. I don't advocate that. They're not recommended for it. They're not designed for it. But that's how I do it. And eventually you'll find you probably have to do it. But as I say, I'm not an advocate for doing that. Cutting discs, for me, obviously time is of the essence when I'm doing jobs like this. But when you use a flat wheel, please be careful that the grip doesn't fall off and hit you, especially if you're using cheaper ones like I use. These are cheap discs, but they work really well. I think these are Cobra, and I get them off eBay or somewhere, but they're significantly cheaper than buying other ones, but they last quite a long time. I tend to keep a supply of old discs, and I once saw a joke about discs don't actually wear out, they just get lower and just higher and higher on the grit number. So these start off, I think these are a 60 or a 40, yeah, they're 60s. This started off as a 60, but it's quite fine now. So if you just want to tickle something just to get a little bit off without taking a huge amount of metal out, that's good. Also, the radius can allow you to get into corners like that without damaging anything, whereas this will destroy it in seconds. I also keep cutting discs when they get small. I use flat ones usually. This is a concave one. But if they get nice and small, it helps you get into corners and things. They're not very good if you're doing normal grinding and cutting, but obviously for those little bits, they help loads. So I'll just whip this across, if I can find my seeing eye goggles. Eye protection is essential. I've had a lot of, silly pain caused by silly little mistakes from flat discs. So for now, that's that. Okay, consider that ground back. As you could probably see, I wish you could just sort of touch it through the screen, but you'd probably see that that is now a really nice smooth radius. The corner's good here. You see there that when I've welded down there originally, I've missed the sill. So I need to just put a runner weld back up there, but that's no biggie. This is thick and this is thick, so even though I've ground it back, that'll be fine. And you can see the seam there's just missed. There is always a temptation to keep grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding to get the shape you want. And sometimes it'll work. If you're pretty good with your welding and your shaping and everything, sometimes you'll just ruin the work you've done. Quick analogy, but when I started at Yorkshire Triumphs, basically they just wanted me to work faster and faster and faster and faster. One of the bosses was always telling me I needed to work quicker, which I got completely, because obviously the more you do in a day, the more you can charge and the more money you make. I get that completely. And after a couple of months, I was really struggling. It was like, you know, I can't go any bloody quicker. I'm just going to have to do what I can do. And I remember saying to my dad, obviously he was still alive then, I remember saying to him that I was going to stop working quickly and I was going to go back to working slowly and slow down and do things right the first time, because try to rush this and then grinding through a corner here and then try to weld that back up when it's gone wafer thin just makes a huge hole, a huge mess. It looks terrible and it takes you hours to fix. Doing it right the first time is quicker. The result is better and you're better to slow down. Obviously I can do it quite quickly because I'm used to doing this stuff a lot. But when I was trying to do this, you know, at home and stuff, just take your time. If it takes you all day, it takes you all day, but doing it wrong and then having to try and fix it, it's like getting the sill in the wrong place. Now, if this is in the wrong place, try to fix it afterwards is a disaster. Big knobbly horrible welds, you know, big holes burnt through and stuff are harder to fix afterwards because you've obviously ground it back and thinned all the material down. So it's significantly easier to do a good job if you take your time and do it properly the first time. But anyway, we'll stop there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fabricate up. This video is probably getting ludicrously long if I've put loads of this in real time. I'm conscious of that. But I'm going to grind some of this back here. I'm going to make a section to go in here. Now, you can see there's an angle on that. I'm not going to make this on video, but that basically comes down like that with an L shape and spot welds, again, on the inside. Now, I can't do that. Obviously, again, I can't get to spot weld it. I certainly can't get to grind it back. So I will do with that what I did with this and stitch weld it around the edges. It's what they do with rally cars and things when they're strengthening them. So, you know, I'm fairly sure it's stronger than it needs to be for this. But it is really getting, you know, a lot stronger now. This corner is one of those bits that's always time consuming, as is the front corner. But to get it right makes such a nice job afterwards. You know, a little smear of filler on that, shape it back to shape, and that's it. That will need very, very minimal filler on it now. The door won't catch it. You know, if you did this all wrong and the door catches or anything like that, the seals won't go back on. All that's just a disaster waiting to happen. So, you know, as I say, take your time, do a nice job. I will come back to this. Once that's made and put in, I'll probably start my next video there, or I'll put it in and then I'll show you after that how I did it. And then I'll go into doing this piece here. Okay, this piece here, sorry, I'm pointing at it when looking at you. So this piece that goes in here, that repair section there. I'll also be going into the wheel arch, so I may or may not record that and show you how to do that. I will be taking off this body stripe that's in the wrong place. It shouldn't be on a marked one anyway, but obviously it's customer's choice. He obviously likes his body stripe, and that's his choice at the end of the day. But if he is getting one back on, I will put it right, because quite honestly, it drives me nuts when they're wrong. But yeah, so it's quite a complicated little piece to do that. It takes quite a long time, as you can see. But the result is worth the time, I think. As I say, I'll be grinding some of that back with the little hair grinder and stuff. And the results will be good. So that's how I do that. I hope that's added to your enjoyment of seeing the sills fitted. I know these videos get a lot of views. So I assume people are finding them useful and enjoying them, watching them, even if they're not finding them useful. If you've enjoyed it, please click the button. Please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot, even if you don't watch my videos, I guess. I suppose it does, really. But yeah, please consider subscribing because it does help me a great deal. Plus it's encouraging, which sometimes I desperately need with this job. So yeah, cool. To be continued with the next part.